Wyoming Territory, 1888. By the time Mei Lin Zhao stepped down from the train at Silver Creek, she had traveled farther than anyone in her family ever had. Across the Pacific. Across California. Across deserts, mountains, and miles of country so wide that sometimes she wondered whether America had an end. She was 24 years old and carried nearly everything she owned in a brown leather suitcase. Everything except the reason she had come. That she carried in her hand. A letter. The paper had softened along the folds because she had opened it too many times during the journey. I will be waiting when your train arrives. You will recognize me from the photograph. Whatever fears you carry with you, leave them on the platform. You will have a home here. The signature beneath those words belonged to Edward Whitmore. The stranger May had crossed an ocean to marry. Steam drifted around her as passengers moved toward waiting families. Men embraced wives. Children ran toward grandparents. Drivers loaded trunks onto wagons. May searched the crowd. Edward was 38, according to his letters. Tall. Clean-shaven. Light brown hair. A respectable cattleman who owned a ranch outside Silver Creek. She had studied his photograph enough to recognize him immediately. But Edward Whitmore wasn't there. Instead, a cowboy stood beside a black horse near the far end of the platform. He was perhaps 36, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair beneath a weathered hat and several days of beard along his jaw. His brown coat had been repaired at one elbow, and dust covered his boots. He didn't resemble the photograph at all. Yet he was watching her. May tightened her grip on the suitcase. The cowboy approached but stopped several feet away. Mei Lin Zhao. Her heartbeat quickened. Mr. Whitmore. The man's expression changed. No. One word. No attempt to soften it. May looked past him. Where is he? The cowboy removed his hat. My name is Caleb Morgan. Edward asked me to meet your train. Then where is Edward? Caleb hesitated. That hesitation frightened her more than any answer could have. He isn't here. I can see that. Caleb glanced toward the station. Building. We should probably talk somewhere warmer. We can talk here. The cowboy studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. May waited. Caleb drew a slow breath. Edward left Silver Creek about 3 weeks ago. The noise of the station seemed to recede. Left? Yes. For where? I don't know. May almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because the alternative was allowing herself to collapse in front of a stranger. He knew when I was coming. Yes. He knew the date. Yes. He wrote that he would be waiting. Caleb's jaw tightened. I know. May looked at him sharply. How? He didn't answer immediately. That bothered her. But before she could press him, the stationmaster called that the train was departing. Steam hissed. The locomotive began pulling away. May turned. For one irrational second, she wanted to run after it. Her last easy path backward was disappearing across the prairie. Caleb seemed to understand. He didn't touch her. Didn't tell her everything would be fine. He simply stood beside his horse while May watched the train become smaller. When it finally vanished, he said, There's a boarding house in town. Mrs. Bennett runs it. I have money. I didn't say you didn't. I can pay for my room. You can. He put his hat back on. But Edward gave me money to meet you. I'd rather use it for something useful. May looked at him. Why should I trust you? Caleb's answer came quietly. You shouldn't. She hadn't expected that. Not yet, he added. Then he lifted her suitcase onto a small wagon without another word. May followed. Not because she trusted Caleb Morgan. Because, for the moment, she had nowhere else to go. Eleanor Bennett was a silver-haired widow who asked few questions. She gave Mei a room upstairs, showed her the lock, and placed the key directly into her palm. Caleb remained downstairs. That mattered. So did the fact that he left after arranging a week's lodging without asking Mei for anything in return. By sunrise, however, Mei's shock had hardened into anger. She found Caleb outside the livery stable. "I want to see Edward's ranch." He was tightening a saddle strap. "Morning. Take me there." Caleb looked at her. "You might not like what you find. I did not cross an ocean to be protected from unpleasant discoveries." Something almost resembling approval appeared in his eyes. "Fair enough." They rode out an hour later. Whitmore Ranch was not prosperous. That was the first lie. The second was the house. Edward had described a wide white farmhouse with a porch overlooking hundreds of cattle. The actual building was a weather-beaten cabin with one broken window. The corral stood empty. Several fence rails had collapsed. The barn doors hung crookedly from rusted hinges. Mei remained on the wagon. "Is this the right place?" "Yes." She unfolded one of Edward's letters. "The ranch has grown beyond anything my father imagined. Some mornings I stand on the porch and cannot count the cattle." Mei looked across an empty field. Perhaps he was bad at counting. Caleb looked at her. Then, despite himself, laughed. Mei didn't. He stopped. "Sorry." She climbed down. The front door was locked, but Caleb knew where Edward kept a spare key. Inside, dust covered the furniture. Cupboards were nearly empty. The bedroom had been stripped of anything valuable. Mei moved through the rooms slowly. With each step, another part of the man from the letters disappeared. She stopped beside a desk. Edward said his wife died. That part was true. How long ago? 6 years. He said he had not remarried because he feared bringing someone into a house where she would always feel like a replacement. Caleb became very still. Mei noticed. "What?" "Nothing. You know that sentence." "No." "You reacted to it." Caleb turned toward the window. Edward talked a lot. It was not an answer. Mei filed the moment away. On the desk she found receipts. Loan notices. Bills. Caleb finally told her the rest. Edward had lost most of his cattle through gambling and poor decisions. He owed money to merchants, ranchers, and at least one lender in Cheyenne. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Nobody knew who you were." He did. Edward wasn't exactly known for considering what other people needed to know. Mei folded her letter. "I am beginning to understand that." She stayed in Silver Creek. At first, only because returning to California immediately would consume most of the money she had left. Eleanor offered her sewing work. Mei had learned from her mother and was exceptionally skilled. Within days, miners brought torn coats. Ranch wives brought dresses. Cowboys discovered that the quiet Chinese woman upstairs could repair trousers better than anyone in town. Mei charged everyone. Including Caleb. Especially Caleb. He appeared one afternoon with a torn sleeve. "How much?" She examined it. 50 cents. His eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Bennett charges 20. Then Mrs. Bennett can fix it." Caleb placed the coat on her table. 50 it is. 2 days later, Mei discovered that the loose step outside Eleanor's kitchen had been repaired. Nobody admitted doing it. She knew. A week later, a sack of coal appeared beside the back door before an early frost. She knew that too. Caleb never mentioned either. Mei began to understand that his kindness was quiet because he didn't expect repayment. That made it harder to dislike him. The letters remained harder. Mei kept them tied with a dark ribbon inside her suitcase. One rainy evening, she was reading one downstairs when Caleb entered to escape the weather. His eyes fell accidentally on the page. Then stopped. Mei noticed. What? Nothing. You have said that before. Caleb removed his wet hat. She held up the letter. You recognize this? No. Mei read aloud. A home should never become a cage. If you come west, I hope you will find enough room here to remain yourself. Caleb's face gave him away. Mei stood. You know it. Silence. Caleb. He walked toward the window. Edward wasn't much of a writer. Mei's fingers tightened around the paper. What does that mean? He asked me to help with some correspondence. The room suddenly felt smaller. What correspondence? At first I thought it was business. And later? Caleb looked at her. He said he was writing to a woman. Did you know she was Chinese? No. Did you know she was me? No. Mei placed another letter on the table. And this? Caleb recognized it. Another. His silence answered. Mei untied the entire bundle. How many? I don't know. How many, Caleb? Most of them. The word struck harder than she expected. Mei stared at the pages. For months, those letters had been Edward's voice. She had read them on nights when the Pacific seemed endless. When passengers stared at her. When she wondered whether crossing the world was madness. Those words had kept her moving. And Edward hadn't written them. You lied to me. I didn't know you existed. You helped him. I thought I was helping a lonely fool speak better than he could write. And when you learned he wanted a wife? I told him not to make promises he couldn't keep. Mei laughed bitterly. He did not need to. You wrote the promises beautifully enough. Caleb flinched. Good. She wanted him to. I crossed an ocean for the words of a man who wasn't real. The words were real. Mei looked up. The promise wasn't. Caleb had no answer. She gathered the letters and walked upstairs. He didn't follow. That was the first decent thing he did that night. Edward Whitmore returned 4 days later. He arrived wearing a tailored coat and riding a horse far too expensive for a bankrupt rancher. Mei recognized him instantly. The photograph had not lied about his face. Only everything behind it. Edward entered Eleanor's boarding house smiling. Mei. She remained behind the sewing table. He opened his arms. My bride. Mei did not move. You left. His smile faltered. Business trouble. For 3 weeks. Longer than expected. You knew my train was coming. I intended to return. But you didn't. Edward glanced around as though embarrassed by her refusal to cooperate. We can discuss all of this privately. We can discuss it here. His expression hardened. Then softened again. Practice charm. I understand you're upset. No. You understand that I know you lied. Edward sighed. Some details were exaggerated. Your ranch. A temporary setback. Your money. Recoverable. Your letters. That stopped him. Mei watched carefully. Caleb told me. Edward's face changed. Of course he did. He wrote them. He helped. He wrote most of them. Edward stepped closer. Does that really matter? I chose what was sent. It mattered when I was deciding whether to leave my country. You came here to become my wife. I came here to meet the man in those letters. Edward's voice lowered. And you have obligations. Mei felt something cold move through her. What obligations? He claimed their correspondence represented an agreement. He claimed money she had brought for her new life was part of their marriage arrangement. Then he made his greatest mistake. He reached toward her suitcase. Mei stepped between them. No. Edward stared. Caleb's voice came from the doorway. She said no. Edward turned. Caleb stood there, hat in hand. No gun drawn. No threat. Just presence. This is between me and my bride, Edward said. Caleb's expression didn't change. You don't have one. Edward laughed. Stay out of my marriage. You don't have one of those either. Eleanor quietly went for the sheriff. Edward left before he arrived. But the look he gave Mei told her the matter wasn't finished. That night, Mei woke to the sound of breaking glass. She sat upright. Another sound came from downstairs. Her suitcase. Mei ran from the room. Edward was climbing through the kitchen window with her case in his hand. Stop. He ran. Mei followed into the yard. Edward reached a saddled horse. Caleb, sleeping in the bunkhouse behind the livery that week, heard the shouting and emerged pulling on his coat. Mei. My papers are in there. Edward rode into the darkness. Caleb ran for his horse. Stay here. No. Mei, my immigration papers. My money. My letters. I'll get them. She grabbed the reins of another horse. I'm coming. Rain began falling. Caleb looked toward the road, then back at her. A different man might have argued. Instead, he adjusted the second saddle. Keep to my left. They rode. Edward headed south. Lightning revealed him occasionally in the distance. The trail narrowed near an old wooden bridge spanning a rocky wash. Edward crossed first. Halfway across, the rain-softened bank gave way. Part of the bridge collapsed behind him. Caleb pulled hard on his reins. His horse stopped inches from the broken edge. Edward disappeared into the darkness beyond. Damn it. Mei stared across the gap. There is another road. Caleb looked at her. What? The cattle trail. What cattle trail? Mei remembered the letter. South of the old bridge, a cattle path follows the creek before turning west beneath the ridge. I ride there when I need to think. She looked at Caleb. You wrote it. Understanding crossed his face. Yeah. Was it true? Every word. They turned south. For the first time, one of the letters that had deceived Mei became useful. They found Edward's horse outside an abandoned mining shack. Smoke was already rising from the chimney. Caleb dismounted. Stay behind me. Mei looked at him. He sighed. Right. Worth trying. Inside, Edward had opened the suitcase. Papers covered a table. He was feeding documents into a small stove. Mei saw her immigration papers near the edge. Edward. He turned. Caleb moved between them. Give her the case. Edward reached for an oil lamp. Stay back. Nobody moved. Then his boot caught the table leg. The lamp fell. Glass shattered. Flame raced across spilled oil. Within seconds, one wall caught. Edward panicked. A burning shelf collapsed between him and the door. Caleb could have left him. Instead, he grabbed a heavy blanket, wrapped it around his arms, and pushed through the smoke. Caleb. Get your papers. Mei saw the suitcase beside the growing flames. She seized another blanket and smothered the burning floor around it. Heat struck her face. She dragged the case away. Behind her, Caleb pulled Edward beneath the fallen shelf. A beam crashed. Mei turned. Caleb. I'm fine. He wasn't entirely, but he was standing. Together, they got Edward outside. Rain hammered the roof as flames consumed the shack. Edward lay coughing in the mud. Mei clutched her suitcase against her chest. Caleb sat beside the road catching his breath. Their eyes met. No declarations. No dramatic embrace. They were alive. For that moment, it was enough. The sheriff found enough evidence in Edward's remaining papers to unravel the rest. He had promised Whitmore Ranch to 2 different buyers. He had forged loan documents. He had attempted to take money that legally belonged to Mei. Most importantly, there had never been a marriage. No contract. No legal obligation. No claim over Mei. Edward Whitmore had brought her across the world with promises he couldn't keep. But he could not decide what happened next. That decision belonged to her. A week later, Caleb learned that Mei had purchased a ticket to California. He found her at the same station where they'd first met. Her suitcase sat beside her. "You leaving?" "Yes." He nodded. "When?" "10 minutes." Another nod. Caleb reached inside his coat. "I brought something." He handed her a folded page. Mei recognized it. The first letter. The one that had begun everything. "Why?" "Because it belongs to you." She opened it. The handwriting was Edward's. But the words. Caleb's. Mei looked up. "Did you mean them?" "What part?" "All of it." Caleb was silent. She read one line. "No person should have to surrender who they are just to earn a place beside someone else." He looked toward the tracks. "Yes. Even when you thought those words belonged to Edward?" "I never thought words belonged to anybody." "Did you mean them?" Caleb finally met her eyes. "Every one." The locomotive whistle sounded. Passengers began boarding. Mei folded the letter. Caleb stepped back. He didn't ask her to stay. That hurt. It also told her everything she needed to know. "Goodbye, Caleb." "Goodbye, Mei." She boarded. Caleb remained on the platform. The train moved. Mei watched him through the window until Silver Creek disappeared. 3 months passed. Caleb Morgan stopped looking toward the station every time a train arrived. Mostly. Winter approached. He returned to ranch work. Fixed fences. Moved cattle. Repaired the barn roof. Life resumed the shape it had before Mei Lin Zhao stepped onto a Wyoming platform. Except it no longer fit him quite as well. One afternoon, Caleb was replacing a fence post when he heard wagon wheels. He looked up. A small freight wagon approached along the road. A woman held the reins. Dusty traveling coat. Dark hair. Straight posture. Caleb stopped breathing. Mei pulled the wagon beside the fence. Behind her sat a sewing machine. 2 wooden crates. A small desk. And her suitcase. Caleb walked toward her slowly. "You came back." Mei climbed down. "No." He stared. "No. I left. I noticed." A smile touched her mouth. "I needed to know I could." Caleb said nothing. Mei looked toward Silver Creek in the distance. "I needed to see my aunt. I needed time where nobody knew Edward, or the letters, or you. And I discovered something." "What?" "I still wanted Wyoming." Caleb's expression softened. Mei continued. "I want to open a sewing shop." "Good. I may sell remedies too." "Also good. I found a storefront." Caleb smiled. "Sounds like you've been busy." "I have." Silence settled between them. Caleb glanced at the wagon. "So you came back for Silver Creek?" "Yes." He nodded. Something in his face dimmed, though he tried to hide it. Mei enjoyed that for perhaps 2 seconds. Then she stepped closer. And perhaps for one cowboy. Caleb looked at her. Perhaps. You should not become arrogant. I'll try. Try harder. He laughed. Mei did too. Then Caleb became serious. I won't ask you for anything. I know. I mean it. I know. Mei looked at him. That is part of the problem. What problem? You never ask. Caleb blinked. Mei held out her hand. Start with supper. His eyes dropped to her hand. Then back to her face. Supper. Tomorrow. At 7. 6. 6. And wear a clean shirt. Caleb looked offended. This is clean. Mei glanced at the dirt across it. Tomorrow, Caleb. She climbed onto the wagon. He stood beside the fence smiling as she drove toward town. This time, Mei Lin Zhao entered Silver Creek because she had chosen the road herself. They did not marry that winter. Or the spring after. Caleb courted her properly. Slowly. Sometimes awkwardly. He took her riding. She taught him enough Chinese to embarrass himself in front of customers. He repaired shelves in her shop. She charged him for every shirt he tore. When they argued, neither disappeared. When they disagreed, neither mistook love for obedience. And eventually, on an autumn evening almost 2 years after Mei first arrived in Wyoming, Caleb asked her to marry him. He did not write the question. He said it himself. Mei made him wait nearly 30 seconds for the answer. Mostly because she enjoyed watching him suffer. Then she said yes. Years later, the letters remained inside a cedar chest beneath the window of Mei's sewing shop. The shop had expanded. One side held dresses, coats, fabric, and thread. The other contained herbs, bandages, and remedies Mei had learned from women in San Francisco and families she'd met across the West. One evening, Caleb entered carrying firewood. He found Mei sitting beside the chest with the old bundle of letters in her lap. He leaned against the doorway. You still keep those? Yes. Why? Mei untied the ribbon. The paper had faded. She found the first letter. The one that had started the journey. Once, she had believed those pages contained a promise. Then she believed they represented a lie. Now she understood they were neither. They were simply words. Choices were what gave words meaning. Mei looked at Caleb. Do you remember what you wrote? Some of it. She read quietly. A home should never become a cage. Caleb smiled faintly. I was younger. You were 36. Very young. Mei laughed. Then she folded the letter. Edward promised me a home. Caleb's smile faded. Mei continued. But he meant a place where I would belong to him. She returned the letter to the chest. You never promised me one. No. You gave me room to build my own. Caleb walked closer. And somehow I ended up living in it. You are fortunate. Extremely. Mei closed the chest. Outside, evening settled over Silver Creek. A train whistle sounded in the distance. For a moment, Mei remembered another whistle. Another platform. Another version of herself standing with a suitcase in one hand and a stranger's letter in the other. She had crossed the Pacific believing courage meant reaching the man waiting at the end of the journey. She had been wrong. Courage had been discovering he wasn't there. It had been facing the truth when the beautiful promises collapsed. It had been taking back her papers from a burning shack. It had been boarding a train even when part of her wanted desperately to remain. And, finally, it had been returning only after she knew she was free not to. Caleb held out his hand. Mei looked at it. Years earlier, Edward Whitmore had expected her to cross an ocean and become his wife. Because letters had made it seem inevitable. Caleb Morgan had done something far more difficult. He had watched her leave. He had loved her enough not to turn that love into another obligation. Mei placed her hand in his. She had crossed an ocean because of another man's promise. She had returned because of her own choice. And when she finally married the cowboy whose words had unknowingly brought her west, it wasn't because fate had delivered her to his door. It wasn't because she owed him gratitude. And it wasn't because she needed someone to give her a future. Mei had already built one. She chose Caleb because, from the first afternoon on that lonely Wyoming platform, he had understood something Edward never had. A woman could be loved without being claimed. Protected without being controlled. Asked without being obligated. And a home worth staying in was never the place where someone told you that you belonged. It was the place you were free to leave.